It has been over a month, and if you're following my BMW N55 engine rebuild project, you might be wondering what the heck happened and why haven't I posted a video on the rest of the assembly, install of the engine, and of course, the engine running. This isn't because I haven't been working on it or the lack of trying, but mostly because I ran into a very major, what I assume to be electrical issue that I'm not equipped or knowledgeable enough to fix. I wanted my last video in the rebuild series to be where I start the engine at the very end, but unfortunately it will not be this video. The video where I explain what I have tried and my results is coming up shortly, but in this video I will go over the remaining assembly and installation of the engine. But before I continue, if this is your first video in the series, check out the full BMW N55 engine rebuild playlist and hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm to help me out with the channel. It's free! In the last couple of videos in this series, I installed the front and rear crankshaft seals, the valve and oil pan gaskets, and the injectors. Now, of course, there are still plenty left to do at this point, so I installed the high pressure fuel pump. I decided not to get a new one and reuse the one that came on the original engine. Of course, I got a new O-ring installed on it to make sure there is no leaks in the future. With the fuel pump installed, I then could install the oil filter housing, once again, renewing the gaskets as this is a very common spot for oil to leak from, especially in these engines. I then torqued the bolts down to spec as I mentioned in the video.
22 Newton meters.
Some of you will no doubt comment below asking why haven't I replaced this or that or upgraded certain parts, and it's an easy guess. It all comes down to the cost. Just like with any other project, there is a budget limitation, and I have set myself a limited budget for the engine and the car. If you don't like the sound of that, don't worry. Stick around and I'll be looking for my next project in the next few short months, and I'll be modifying and upgrading at the same time of the rebuild on that one. Or at least that's my plan. This project was proving to myself that I can rebuild an engine without anyone's help. Anyway, as you can see, I have also reused the Vanos solenoids. These tested just fine and I gave them a good clean right before installing. At this point, things started moving a little faster. I installed the high pressure fuel lines from the fuel pump to the injectors. You want to use a crowfoot wrench to torque these down and prevent fuel leaks in the future. Links in the description. With this side of the engine looking a little bit more complete, it was time to switch to the other side and install the exhaust manifold with the turbocharger. I scraped the remnants of the old gaskets out, cleaned the area, and then installed new ones one by one.
Now I'm going to install these new graphite exhaust gaskets, so they go on each pipe right here.
They should fit under snugly and will be crushed when the assembly is installed and torqued down. The O-rings on the oil lines are a quick swap for a set of new ones, and it's time to marry the two together to the engine. I suggest angling the engine a little bit more or have someone help you as it can be a little awkward to get it in there, and put the first couple of bolts in at the same time. A cordless drill makes a quick work of getting the flange nuts finger tight, and then it's time for a torque wrench to get these up to spec.
Alright, so we're doing 8 Newton meters, or that's like 6 pound-feet of torque, and it has to be done in the correct sequence. I'm gonna put a picture up just so you know what the sequence is, but basically it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 10, 11, and then so basically starting from the middle and going outwards. And now we're gonna do exactly the same thing, but to 13 Newton meters, which is like 9.6 pound-feet of torque.
It's important not to retighten them after the first or the second round and follow the procedure exactly if you don't want to have exhaust leaks in the future. Off camera, I also attached and torqued down the turbo oil lines as well as the bracket below the turbo housing itself. And after some plumbing, this side of the engine is done for now. I then switched to the front of the engine, and the first item on my list was to switch over the belt tensioner from the old block to the newly built engine.
So we're gonna torque this one, the one that's the tensioner, to 38 Newton meters. And I couldn't find the specs for this one, so I'm gonna do the same thing. I assume it's gonna be the same, but hopefully it is.
This is one of the items I didn't really think about at the time of building the engine, but I would definitely recommend switching out the idler pulley for a new one. This might be a future DIY I will tackle with the engine already in the car. In the meantime, I installed the vibration damper, which now I have learned would have benefited from a front crank seal guard plate.
Okay, so we're gonna install the bolts one at the top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Basically in a star pattern, just like you would do your wheels or whatever. And now we're gonna torque it to 35 Newton meters.
You live and you learn, I guess. If any of you think of doing something like this at home, it's honestly worth it, just for the amount of engine knowledge you will get from doing this. Not to mention the patience you will learn. Anyway, I dropped the front differential in place and torque it to spec.
We're gonna torque these 4 bolts to 65 Newton meters, or it's like 48 pound-feet of torque. All right, now we're gonna install the bearing support. New seal goes in just like that, and we torque it to 21.4 Newton meters.
Next on the list is the water pump. This sucker just goes in, and with the help of a couple bolts, it's in place.
These are going to be 10 Newton meters and then 90 degrees of rotation. So from here to here, it's going to be 90 degrees.
Most of the big items are now installed, so I installed the engine support that will attach to the engine mount once it's in the car, and then the heat shield above the exhaust manifold that holds the vacuum regulator. I then positioned the spark plug and injector wires in their place, torque down the spark plugs, and then install the ignition coils. The top of the engine is pretty much done at this stage, and I can proceed to install the wiring loom on the front of the engine. There are lots of small little wires going everywhere here, but luckily they are all just long enough to plug into the sensor or part that it's supposed to go to. The plugs are different between them most of the time as well, so that helps. One important item here is to not forget the ground wire on the bottom left corner of the engine. The same goes for the intake side of the engine. The bird's nest of wires slides onto the engine, and then I start sorting them out and plugging in what I can. The rest will be plugged in once the ECU and the rest of the intake sensors are close by. And look at this beauty now. It's starting to look more and more like a real engine, and at this point I'm getting really excited to get this job finished and put it back in the car. But before I get too excited, we still have to install a couple of parts.
Alright, one of the last pieces we have right now is the flywheel. Of course, I got all new bolts. Don't forget this little cover. I think it's like a magnet cover type of thing. I don't really know what it is, but it's got to go in here, so make sure it goes in there. Put this on properly. New bolts. My thing through this engine rebuild has been replace everything that's really difficult to get to, and if it's not as difficult, I mean, I can maybe reuse a bolt in here, or if it's not like essential, I don't think it's a big deal. Of course, all the inner bolts, yeah, you definitely want to reuse those. I mean, $20–30 worth of bolts. If it doesn't hold, you know, if you reuse something that doesn't hold, like you've blown your engine for 20 bucks. But like little aluminum bolts to hold this stuff in and that stuff in, does it really matter? I don't think so. Sure, BMW says replace them. They say replace everything. But if you can, if it's easy to get to, and let's say it gets loose after a couple of months, you can just replace it then. We're gonna torque these to 60 Newton meters and then 45 degree rotation. We're gonna use a T60 Torx socket.
If you're wondering why am I struggling with this on the engine hoist, well, it was impossible to do on the engine stand, as the engine stand was in the way of the bolts for the flywheel, and I couldn't think of any other way of doing this at the time. And now for one of my favorite shots of this video. I love how after weeks of working on this engine and replacing most of the parts on the inside, it slides into the engine bay and is ready to be connected to its lifelines. One of the struggles I had here is getting the AC compressor to go around the engine. I chose not to disconnect it as I don't have the equipment to draw off the refrigerant in the system, and having to call someone in just sounded like a hassle.
So we're pretty damn close. We have a couple issues. I need to somehow get the differential to drop in and at the same time get that aligned. No wonder people told me get the transmission out at the same time. But I think after a bit of struggling, I'll get there. But yeah, getting closer. Takes a little bit. But, you know, it is what it is. Almost there. Taking a little bit of time, but not too much. Probably been doing this for half an hour. Trying to get the engine aligned. Well, it's been about another hour and I finally got pretty much all of the bolts in but one. So I'm tightening them down. Once I do that last bottom one, I'm gonna tighten the top, make sure everything is nice and flat. And yeah, that might be it for the evening though. I have to continue tomorrow. Well, I just had a pretty big scare. Thought I had to pull the engine out again. Hopefully I fixed it, but basically what was happening is I torqued all of these bolts. I was like, all right, this is awesome. Basically ready to like almost start it, you know? And then I tried to spin the engine right there, just tried to spin it and make sure everything was good so I could put those flywheel or the torque converter bolts in, right? And the engine just would not spin at all. And I was like, okay, what's going on? I know it's supposed to spin, it's definitely supposed to spin. So I did a bit of Googling to see what could it be, and turns out that my torque converter didn't go in right, and basically the flywheel was pressing against it at an angle, and I could actually see it in here, like it was bent even a little bit to where it was touching that sensor. So got a bit scared, but I loosened all of the bolts and then spun the engine at that point, and basically by spinning the engine and it being kind of caught on the flywheel, it rotated the torque converter and it popped into place. I heard it go like a click and it clicked into place. So I think it should be fine. I'm kind of hoping that it's fine. Now I can easily spin the engine by hand, so it's definitely not caught on anything. And there's a tiny bit of gap between the flywheel and the torque converter when I put my finger in there. Or a camera, I tried the camera too just to see if it was straight, and it looks fine. So I think once I finish up torquing these bolts on the bottom again, I will put those torque converter bolts in and it should be good to go. So yeah, maybe when people were suggesting pulling the transmission with the engine at the same time, maybe that was a good idea. But yeah, it's been a few hours dealing with this stuff. Anyway, all right, now I'm using a bit of technology to make my life easier and not have to go under the car every single time. So this is the hole where you're going to be putting in the torque converter bolts. So this is what we see right now is the flywheel. So I have to rotate the flywheel until I can align it with the torque converter and then put the bolts in. So normally when I took them off, I had to spin the engine a little bit, go underneath and see what's going on. Right now I just taped my little camera in there and hey, it works. Love it. A little bit of wiggling and we got it perfectly centered. Now we can put the bolts in. Woohoo. And one of them is torqued. It's definitely not easy, but should be another 15-20 minutes. We'll have the other 5 in. So I just wanted to show you my little setup. So I have that camera literally with some like scotch tape. I have the video so I can see what I'm doing. This is so much nicer. I don't have to crawl all the way around, so I can just go. There you go. Got it threaded with my fingers. Now I'm just gonna grab the socket. Finish the job. Obviously need my second hand now, but. Alrighty guys, so I haven't been filming a lot, but I have done a lot. As you can see, I have the engine support arm and the engine mount installed on this side as well as the other side. I have the catalytic converter installed. I have made it obviously the transmission and the engine and installed the torque converter bolts in there. I have the AC compressor installed as well as the steering pump installed in there as well. So that's all done. It's now actually sitting on engine mounts, which is pretty nice. This is just there as a safety basically. Same thing in here, probably not gonna see it, but yeah, in there. But I can take you under the car a little bit, show you what I mean. So as you can see, the catalytic converter is installed, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to see, but the engine support arm thingy is installed as well. And it's sitting on what's in there, which is the engine mount. A bit difficult to see, but it's right there. So there's been a lot of crawling under the car, but not that much left. Well, still a lot left, but I think I got the really frustrating stuff and crawling under the car type of stuff mostly done. So now I'll just basically clean this up, run the piping, connect the electrical, and start the engine. So I was about to install this coolant pipe, and then I realized that the plastic broke off as I was taking it out a couple months ago. So instead of replacing the entire coolant line, which is in good condition, it's fine, I got one of these replacement upgrades type of thing. So I'm just gonna cut this off, put the new one in. It comes with a clamp, and this was only like 12 bucks instead of paying like, I don't know, 100 bucks for this entire piece. Should be pretty good and probably last longer because it's metal and not a little piece of plastic. So I just broke this in half so it'd be easier to remove. So it should come out, and I should be able to get that out as well. Just need like a screwdriver or something. So I cleaned the inside out a little bit. Goes on perfectly. I'm gonna tighten it just enough, and then once I put it in the car, I'll make sure that this isn't in the way and that this orientation is good as well. All right, so I got this one installed. As you can see, it's clipped in on the turbo. It's going down to that flexible piece over there. And at the moment, it's still a little bit loose. I just gotta tighten those two, and it'll be ready to go. Nice. And if that wasn't clear, it's for the bigger intercooler. So we have the same thing on the other side, so we're gonna have to run that one as well. All right, so we've done a little bit of progress. Got the intake manifold installed, trying to figure out where all the wires go. A lot of them will go right into that ECU over there. Some are a little bit not clear, but I'm sure we can figure this out. I do have one ground that I'm not really sure about, like that one over there. I'm not really sure where it's supposed to go, but we'll have to find it. Getting closer. I think I'm gonna be able to start it in about an hour or so. Very excited.
Well guys, this part was filmed over a month ago, and oh how I wish this went to plan. The engine was supposed to fire up at that point, and after some finishing touches, I would be enjoying my BMW 335 M Sport and all of the work I have put into it. Unfortunately, it did not go to plan from this point on, and the engine wouldn't start. It would crank for as long as the battery would allow, but would not fire or even sputter. With that in mind, it's time to end this video as it's already far longer than I wanted it to be, but I wanted to show each step. Subscribe to the channel to stay tuned and find out what I have tried so far to get the engine started. The list is long and I think you will find it interesting where my head was going troubleshooting this engine. That's all for now. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next one.